Hello, friends at the Radcliffe Conference and everyone else at StokerCon 2023. It's a huge pleasure and honor to be presenting with you today. My name is Carlos A. Gonzalez. I'm a doctoral candidate in the Romance Languages and Literatures Department at Harvard University, specializing in French and Spanish language horror. Today, I'm going to be presenting on two French language films, Teddy from 2020, a horror comedy directed by Ludovic and Zoran Bukarma, and Adoration 2019, a horror romance from Fabrice Dueltz. In these films, love and rejection are treated through the eyes of obsessed teenagers, rendering them into monstrous acts of violence. In my presentation today, I want to ask a few questions prompted by viewing these films. For example, how compulsory gender roles cause violence according to the films, how queerness shows up in these films to interrogate or disrupt these roles, how can young lovers so easily fall into obsessive styles of attachment that instigate violence. Let's take a look at some of the elements in the film. The first element I'd like to take a look at is the abundant Edenic imagery that the films make use of. Both films juxtaposition human beings and nature in such a way as to blur the clear distinction between them, so that one always spills over into the other. The settings in both films are absolutely gorgeous. In Adoration, Paul, who lives with his mother in a sanatorium in the country because of the terms of her employment, spends nearly all of his time outside in the woods. The film opens with him rescuing a fallen bird from a bundle of string it was tangled in. Paul gives the bird not only a name, Robbie, but a voice. He has conversations with it, even responding as the bird. He takes this bird to live in a shoebox in his room with the intention of nursing it back to health and perhaps making a friend. It's no accident that Paul's room is wallpapered with foliage patterns, mimicking the outside environment, but also making both spaces permeable to one another. He is locked in the woods as much as he can be locked in his room. Soon, what feels at first like the innocent playing of a young boy is revealed to be the effects of deep loneliness and insecurity. The bird dies, and Paul is utterly crushed. That is until his theophanic encounter with Gloria, a 12-year-old psychiatric patient who is prone to running away, and with whom Paul associates the sickly, trapped Robbie in need of someone to help it fly away. It is her note that he leaves with him before being captured again that feels so exciting for him and triggers his love for her. It reads, "I think we can be friends." For Paul and Gloria, their environment is one of shared incarceration, and this sows the seeds for Paul's obsession with Gloria later in the film. Teddy's environment is similarly fecund and isolating. Although he is a member of the village and free to move as he pleases, his socioeconomic status renders him an outcast. He is a high school dropout from a poor family living in a home surrounded by forested green hills filled with potential if only the right person would come to take advantage of it, which Teddy fully intends to do. He proposes to his longtime girlfriend Rebecca, still in school and carefully watched over by her father, to marry him and build a house together on an empty lot he plans to save up enough money to buy. The wilderness would be at his literal doorstep. Only a small distance away, a neighbor's sheep have been slaughtered by wolves, which never appear in the movie, but whose presence is always felt. Paul and Teddy, such different individuals, both can only imagine a future of freedom within the confines of the heterosexual relationship they find themselves in, and only by trying to meet the expectations placed on each of them by compulsory Edenic heterosexuality can they envision a future that is less lonely, less susceptible to predation. As the films continue, however, they're shown to be wrong. What the film seems to indicate is that compulsory heterosexuality leads to obsession because of an inability to imagine any alternative, and because of the ways in which the identity of the lover is intertwined with that of the beloved. Scholars of the phenomenology of sexual relationships point this out. For example, Dr. Ellie Anderson proposes a distinction between love for the beloved and love for the relationship in her 2021 article, Phenomenology and the Ethics of Love. And in her 2019 book, Creating Romantic Obsession, Kathleen Perez-Rogers makes a similar claim that it is not the person, but the idea of the person that ignites passion and lovesickness, which is the term she uses to describe erotic monomania. It is this very obsession that, when disrupted, and usually by an outside party, leads to violence. To be clear, this is not to say that non-heterosexual relationships cannot also become obsessive or violent. That would be a ridiculous claim. Queerness, in the Butlerian sense that I'm using, means the ability to imagine a life outside of compulsory narratives of any kind, be it gender, sexuality, or whatever essentialist impositions one might find themselves under. Queerness as an antidote to compulsory heterosexuality is not a call for compulsory homosexuality or polyamory or asexuality or whatever other iteration of love within a relationship you might find. In the films, queerness is that which calls for and survives the disruption of the hegemonic heterosexual narrative. Compulsory heterosexuality is inherently predatory in the films. So in Teddy, for example, Rebecca is treated less as a character within her own right with agency and desires, and more as the end goal of a cast of male characters. There is, of course, Teddy, who feels that their relationship is endgame, that the two of them have no greater calling than to literally build a home together. There is Rebecca's father, who jealously guards his daughter despite her having already consented to regular sex with Teddy. There is also Benjamin, the better socially and economically positioned boy in town who, because of his wealth and bright future, eventually wins Rebecca over. Teddy breaks into her room to beg her, literally on his knees and in tears, not to leave him, but to no avail. His failure to secure a life with Rebecca leads to unimaginable violence as a result, where Rebecca's desires are not those of an autonomous person, but instead of a traitor who denies Teddy's future and therefore must be punished. And since traditionally teen boys are depicted as sex crazed, sexual violence perpetrated on them by women is played down or dismissed. Ghislaine, his manager at the spa where he works, throws herself onto Teddy. She pins him down onto the massage table despite his protestations, bewildered that a young man wouldn't jump at the chance of sex with an older woman. Having just been bitten by a werewolf that day, he begins to bleed from the wound, echoing the virginal imagery of Eden from before. Ghislaine mistakes the blood for excrement and laughs at Teddy, calling him a little boy as opposed to a man, for being so afraid of sex with a woman that he shits himself. Her laughter continues to ring as Teddy runs from the spa. It is later in the film when Teddy, no longer with Rebecca and unable to imagine an alternative, reciprocates Ghislaine's sexual advances, but ends by tearing her tongue out of her mouth with his teeth, leaving her to die. It's also strongly implied, though admittedly never directly articulated, that Paul is the victim of sexual abuse by his mother. The expectations placed on Paul in the fatherless house are not merely parental, but spousal. Simone, his mother, is jealous of Paul's nascent relationship with Gloria. Simone even gets into an argument with him about whether he still loves her, citing his desire to not want to spend his nights reading to her in bed or eating dinner with her. She feels free to touch Paul's body in a way that clearly makes him uncomfortable, and any articulation of boundaries by Paul is taken as an attack on her personally. The cinematic associations between Simone and Gloria should also not be ignored. When Paul first meets Gloria, she is haloed by a golden light from above, and her wide blue eyes seem to take up the whole screen. She looks very much like a frightened and threatened Simone. Perhaps to Paul, Gloria is a chance to live up to his mother's expectations without the accompanying sexual abuse he had been suffering. Animality plays no small part in questioning the hold that heterosexuality has on the protagonist. Hinkle, a widower that Gloria and Paul run into and who gives them food and shelter, can see clearly that something is wrong with the story the children tell of how they got there. He eventually coaxes it out of Paul and loses his life in an attempt to take them back to the psychiatric institute when an erratic and violently angry Gloria forces him to lose control of the car. Before this, Hinkle takes Paul out into the woods by the river to watch a flock of herons. He tells Paul that he is convinced his late wife is one of those birds, and that when he dies, he will be reincarnated into this animal in order to be reunited with her, not in marriage or any human relationship, but in the soul deep bond of love that ties two people or two birds together. Teddy's own transformations parallel his relationship with Rebecca, such that by the time he cuts the relationship off, he is transformed completely into a werewolf and wreaks havoc on the population before being put down like a dog by his uncle to spare him from the townsfolk. Teddy's active violence doesn't end with his own death, however. In the end scene of the movie, we see Rebecca, covered in blood, obviously in shock, approach the house where the townsfolk and police are clamoring to get in, sure of Teddy's hand in the crime for no other reason than because of his outcast status. On her left shoulder is a deep claw wound, implying that her own lycanthropic curse is only beginning. So then, according to these films, what is to be done? It seems like the only reasonable answer is to burn down the garden. Sayak Valencia wrote in Gore Capitalism in 2010, quote, "When there is no other option to choose from, we have to be capable of remaking that very option. If no other option is available, may that choice not be the end of us, but rather through our daily insurrection, may it come to re-signify us." End quote. In other words, we have to be able to imagine an alternative to the unimaginable. Without the freedom to love, to be loved, to be beloved, to enter into and end relationships differently than how they are meant to by the dominant compulsory system of heterosexuality, we're only doomed to more violence. Thank you all so much for your time. It has been a pleasure presenting, and please do get in touch if you have the opportunity through my email. I'm very grateful, and have a great convention.